You know, we have been looking, God had us look at stepping out. And let's review just for a minute the examples that we looked at on stepping out. The first one we had was Peter. You remember him? He actually stepped out of a boat. He actually stepped into the Sea of Galilee, and it was probably about 200 feet deep there, is what we think, and in the middle of a storm. And he did fine till he took his eyes off of Jesus. So we learned from him that we should step out, but we have to keep our eyes on Jesus. And the second example that we looked at, if you remember, was a ruler who had a sick servant. And he wanted Jesus to come and to heal that servant. But I guess he had a second thought. As Jesus was on his way, the centurion sent a message to Jesus, you remember? And he said, you don't even need to come. I know what authority you have. So all you have to do is just speak it and it'll happen. And Jesus said he hadn't found such faith as that in all of Israel. And Jesus spoke it, and sure enough, it happened. So there was somebody who stepped out, but as they stepped out, they realized the authority of Jesus Christ, which is really important when we step out. The third one we looked at last week, you recall, were four men who stepped out, who actually, in a way, stepped down. You remember they tore the roof off and let the paralytic down, and Jesus healed him, but he also forgave his sins. And so sometimes when we step out for Jesus, it is not for our situation. Sometimes it's for somebody else. And we discussed how that often people need help coming to Jesus. And so when we step out, we can take them, by the hand or put our hand around their shoulder and say, come on, I'll walk with you. Some of the churches that Tina and I have attended who had altar calls, and the congregation would be singing. I remember sometimes when they would offer the invitation for people to accept Jesus, and here coming down the aisle would be two people. One was coming to accept Jesus, and the other was just encouraging them and walking along with them, a believer. And God is going to call us to those kinds of situations. Well, today we're looking at a different kind of stepping out. I would say this is stepping in a way. Life presents some real challenges to us sometimes. And sometimes it's connected directly to our beliefs, and sometimes it's just because I think the enemy has decided that if you're going to do something for Jesus, I'm going to come against you. And I think sometimes we end up with what we're going to call today fiery trials. And before we get into this story about the boys who said no, let's look at some background information about where this story takes place and what was going on at that time. This story is focused around Babylon, the Babylonian Empire. The king at that time was Nebuchadnezzar. What were these three Jewish boys doing in Babylon? I inserted in your bulletin a map. Does everybody have the map? Babylon, located between the Euphrates and Tigris River, is about halfway down on the right there. And below it, you'll see Chaldea. And the people lived there. Their names, they were called Chaldeans. It turns out in history, if you look at the history of Babylon, the Chaldeans were those who were in the upper levels of government in Babylonia. So the Babylonian Empire flowed or took place beside those rivers, but then you can see it also came around and they conquered down into Assyria, and right where the word empire is, right in that area would be Sea of Galilee, Jerusalem. So they actually came in and conquered Israel. Now, God allowed this to happen, and he used Nebuchadnezzar to do this. And the reason was that Israel had left God. He had warned them. He had tried to draw them back to him. He had sent prophets. He had done everything he could to try to bring Israel back to him, and they refused. And so God, being a just God, he allowed Nebuchadnezzar to come into that part of the country and take them captive. Now, when he took them captive, let's look at what happened. I don't have it in your notes, but let's go to Daniel. The first chapter. I not only don't have it in your notes, but I don't have it marked in my Bible. Daniel 1. Daniel 1. I think it's good. The Lord just wants us to see how all this came about. The 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. So God, he actually brought Nebuchadnezzar in against the Israelites. And you see in verse 2 that Jehoiakim, king of Judah, he gave him into the hand of Nebuchadnezzar with some of the articles of the house of God, which he carried into the land of Shinar, which is that area over there, Babylon, Tigris, Euphrates River area. He carried them over there, and he brought the articles into the treasure house of his God. Then the king instructed Ashpenaz, the master of his eunuchs, to bring some of the children of Israel and some of the king's descendants and some of the nobles, young men, good-looking, no blemish, gifted in wisdom, possessing knowledge, and he brought them to serve in the king's palace, whom they might teach the language and literature of the Chaldeans. So that's how we find these 3 boys in Babylon. When Nebuchadnezzar took Israel, he brought some of the cream of the crop of the people back into his palace to learn his language and his customs and all that. He was going to train them to be good Babylonians, good Chaldeans. And so that's how these boys got there. Now, we won't read the rest of the story in chapter 1, but I know you remember it. Daniel was a 4th boy or person that was brought in. And Daniel refused to eat the food that Nebuchadnezzar set before him and wanted to just eat vegetables and fruits and not partake of the rich foods that Nebuchadnezzar was going to insist that he eat. And you remember the story. He said, just let me eat mine, and you judge after a while whether who's in better shape, your people or me. And of course it turned out that Daniel was not only better physically, but Daniel was able to interpret some dreams that Nebuchadnezzar had, and God gave him the interpretation of those dreams. And so that elevated Daniel. So that's a little bit of the background. Now, Babylon was a source of astrology. Now, they were astronomers. They tried to understand the heavens and the stars and so forth. But they were astrologers, which came with their occult religion. They would be able to look at the stars, they thought, and predict what was going to happen to you. or predict what was going to happen to their country. They were also developed a lot of skill in mathematics, and they also were the source later. If you remember the Hammurabi Code, they were actually the source of what a lot of our laws are based on, as far as ethics and morals and things like that. And you find that Nimrod in Nineveh, which is north of this, actually up at the top of the yellow area, that's about where Nineveh would be. Nimrod had built the Tower of Babel, and he was the chief nemesis of Nebuchadnezzar and Babylon. And actually, Nebuchadnezzar destroyed that Assyrian capital of Nineveh. That we have studied how Nineveh was given a chance by God, and they repented. Well, later on, they went back to their old ways, and that's when God used the Babylonian Empire to take down Nineveh. The Chaldeans, they focused a lot in the area of magicians, magic, and astronomer and astrology. And they were the ones who were in the king's service. They were like at the highest level of government with the king. They had many gods in the Babylonian Empire, but one in particular was Marduk. And this god was a combination of a dragon and a serpent. So it was a serpent dragon, and you can see pictures of it. They've actually discovered, archaeologists have uncovered ceramic tile that has a lot of these gods and these characters on them. But Marduk was the chief one. So heavily into the gods. There is some thinking that the story today that we're going to look at, that the statue, the image that Nebuchadnezzar had made was of a representation of the god Marduk. There's some evidence to that. I put a note in here because this is really interesting. The Babylonian furnaces. These were not little furnaces. If you go into the history, these furnaces were like buildings. They were huge. And down below, they had openings where they could put the material into the furnace, into this huge building. And they were made of brick. They didn't have many stones, so they made the brick, and they made these furnaces. And the top was open. And so a lot of times you could actually put material in that way. But they used them for another reason. And this was interesting. I found this, Harry Rammer, I found where he had translated an inscription on one of the furnaces that the archaeologists excavated in Babylon. And it had this statement on this furnace. It was actually stamped or cut into the stone. This is the place where men who blasphemed the gods of Chaldea died by fire. So these furnaces not only smelted iron, and because they were big into war and their iron implements, and also gold and things like that, but this is where they burned people to death who wouldn't worship their gods. So they would take them up on an area above that furnace, and they would throw them down in there. These furnaces at normal temperature, I read, was somewhere around 1300 centigrade. So, I mean, things pretty much vaporized when you put them in there. Now, we're going to see in this story, because Nebuchadnezzar was so angry with these three boys, he had that furnace heated up 7 times its regular temperature. So we're talking about anything that was close to it couldn't exist. It vaporized it. Nebuchadnezzar was king. I gave you the years. He was king for 43 years. He also was credited with capturing Jerusalem, as we talked about. He had tried to give them a chance the first time he took Jerusalem. He gave them a chance to just kind of um, be good subjects. Well, they rebelled against him. The second time that he came in 586 BC, there was a revolt there. That's when he actually carried them off and took them to Babylon. And these three boys, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, you're probably familiar with those names. Those are Chaldean names. Those are not their Jewish names. In Daniel 1, you can read their Jewish names if you'd like. But that's a little bit of background about this story. Now let's get into the story, because this is where God has us today, learning a lesson about stepping out. This story begins with Nebuchadnezzar building, constructing, having made a huge image. Now, here's what we're trying to do is get a perspective here of this image. It was 9 feet base. If you convert the cubits that are there in Daniel, it was 9 feet wide. But if that's 9 feet, it was 90 feet tall. So it's 10 of these. I mean, it's on up there. You know, when the very first time I ever looked at this story, I wondered, how did he get that thing to stand upright? Because let's think about it. Let's say, would you say that's about from here to here, maybe 9 feet? It's somewhere close, maybe there. But think about 10 of those. I mean, this was a huge statue. There's some thinking that it wasn't pure gold, because that would be a lot of pure gold. There's some thinking that it was made out of some other material and then gold was laid on top of it. But the point is, Nebuchadnezzar decided that he wanted everyone to worship this image which stood for a god. It probably was for Marduk, more than likely. And he got carried away with the power that he had to make you or them bow down and worship this image. Every time music played, the people knew when they heard the music, they were supposed to stop what they were doing and bow down to this image. Well, the Chaldeans, who were in Nebuchadnezzar's high court, were already upset that he had appointed Daniel. And they were already upset that he had actually appointed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in some sort of leadership position. And so they were going to use this to get back at those three boys and get back at what Nebuchadnezzar had done. Nebuchadnezzar said that if you don't bow down when you hear the music, you get put into the furnace. And he made it a decree. So the Chaldeans went to him and they said, you know what? There are 3 boys who won't do this. They refuse. And they're Jewish boys. They're from Israel. And Nebuchadnezzar immediately, he actually got furious, we're told in the scriptures, that anybody would deny his decree to bow down. And so the story goes that he brought them in and he basically said, is this true? Is it true that you won't bow down? And then he threatened them. He said, you better bow down. If you don't bow down, you're going into the furnace. And then he even spoke against God Jehovah, and he said, and we'll see if your God can save you. So then he told them, so bow down. And then, I'm paraphrasing. He said to him, what do you think about that? And the three boys spoke up and they said, basically, we don't have to think about that. We're not going to do it. You can go ahead and, if we don't bow down, you can go ahead and put us in the furnace. We believe that our God will save us. But if he doesn't, then that's okay. We will still not bow down and worship this God. So he got so upset, he had them heat this building-sized furnace 7 times hotter than usual. And he commanded his men and some of the men in his army, you take these 3 boys, you throw them in there. Now, apparently, he was standing back watching. And down at the bottom, if you see the pictures of these big furnaces, they're like arched doorways in. And I'm sure he was standing down there and watching. And the soldiers who took the boys to throw them in vaporized as they got up there close and threw them in. They were burned up. And they weren't even in there. It was that hot. And he's standing here watching. And he sees the 3 boys walking around in the fire. And then he gets the person there beside him. He said, Dorothy, didn't we throw 3 boys in there? Yeah. Well, how come I see 4? He saw 4. And he said that the 4th one was likened to the Son of Man. More than likely, it was Jesus Christ, is the conclusion you can draw, who had a Christophany, where he appeared prior to when he actually came as the Son of God and was born to Mary. But this 4th person isn't, and they're walking around, and they're not burning, nothing. And I assume, he had to call them out. Nobody could get close enough to bring them out, so he must have called them out. And here they come through one of those arches. And all of their, they had put them in their clothes and tied them up. All of those ropes were gone. Those had all been burned off. What was keeping, those were gone. And when they walked up to him, there wasn't a hair singed or burned. Can you imagine that? There wasn't even a smell of smoke on their clothes. Nothing. It was as if they hadn't been in there. And the end of the story is that Nebuchadnezzar was so taken back by this miracle that happened that he announced to his entire kingdom, all of Babylonia, from now on, if no one is to say a word against the God of these 3 boys. And there's some thought that he actually began to believe in God Jehovah himself at that time. So that's the story. And it's an interesting story because it has a lot of applications to us. So let me ask you a question. At this time, right now, are you in any kind of fiery trial? Now, that may be a relative question because to some of us, we would say, yeah, I'm in the middle of the fire right now. And you tell somebody and they go, well, that's not too bad. Let me tell you about what's really a fire that I'm in. Or let me tell you about a fiery trial they're in over in Syria or in the Middle East where their heads are being cut off, So, but we all have trials, and some of them are fiery trials. Some of them look like there's no way out. Some of them look like, and sometimes if we're not careful, we feel like we're going to be vaporized. I don't have a chance. But we learn from this that even at times when we're in these trials, Jesus Christ is with us. We have to remember that. He is with us. I like what these boys said, although I would pray that I would actually say that too, is our God will save us, but if he doesn't, I'm okay with that. Now that's where the difficulty comes in some of our fiery trials. Sometimes when we're in the middle of them, we look up and we say, God, why would you allow me to be here? Why would you allow this to happen to me? And we begin to have a discussion with God and question his faithfulness to us. What we have to understand is that these trials are for building up our faith. And if we're at a point where we have to give our life because the trial has to do with our faith, then we give our life. And that's what our faith should cause us to be able to do, is to not only live for Jesus, but if we have to die for Jesus. Now in this country, by and large, we don't have to worry about that right now. You don't have to worry about somebody breaking into your house right now and telling you, Edie, do you believe in Jesus Christ? If you say yes, your head's gone. Right now, in most of the area of this country, we don't have to worry about that. But it happens. I remember a school shooting. The account. They went into the classroom. Are you a Christian? You said yes, you were shot. No chance to deny it. If you said yes, you were dead. And so there are some times in this country when it has happened. But generally, we have freedom where we can believe in this country. It may change. I pray not. But these boys said no to Nebuchadnezzar. Can you say no? How much pressure would some people have to have in order to say yes to the world, to our government, to the system that is trying to tell us, you be this way, you believe this way? Now, we should be able to say no today. God will help us say no. And it's really important that we do say no today. So let's look at the lessons for us. First of all, Satan is fixated on being worshipped. And I gave you some scriptures here. You can look them up. Isaiah 14 is all about Satan saying, when he was an angel, saying, I want to be like God. I want to be God. But he knew he couldn't be God, so he said, I want to be like God. And his whole purpose has been to get people to worship him like God. And he's still doing that today. And the Antichrist, during the time of tribulation, that's exactly what he's going to do when he becomes possessed by Satan. He is going to want to be worshipped as God. So we shouldn't be upset when we look at the world around us and it's telling us, you stop worshiping Jesus Christ, God the Father, Holy Spirit. You worship this. And they give us an alternative and tell us, to be politically correct, you need to do this. You need to worship this. The world system also wants our worship. And I gave you a scripture there you can look at later. But the entire world system is not trying to be like God, is not trying to follow. It's just the opposite. And it wants you and me to get in line. You remember in Matthew 4 when Satan had Jesus and he took him in the wilderness, he was tempted. Do you remember one of the temptations? He took him up and he showed Jesus all of this land that Jesus could see. And he was talking about the world. And Satan, can you believe he actually said this to Jesus? Satan said to him, "You see all that? You can have all of that on one condition. You fall down and you worship me." And Jesus quoted scripture and said, "Absolutely not. I'm not going to worship you." Satan comes to us today saying, look at what you could have. Look at what's available here. This is mine. I'll give it to you. Just worship me. And sadly, there are people today that are doing that. They're giving up their life in order to worship him and to have the things of the world. It shouldn't surprise us if there's a temptation coming against us, trying to see if it can break through and have us worship the world, worship the things, worship what we have, worship the blessings that God's given us instead of God. The third point is fiery trials are just a part of life. It's part of what church is all about. We put our arms around each other. We pray for each other. We cry for each other. We also laugh and celebrate and have a good time in the Lord with each other. But those fiery trials come. They just do. And it's part of the fallen nature of this world and of mankind. But they will come. But the question is, what will you say when they come? Will you say no to what they're maybe trying to tempt you to do? Or will you say yes to God? Well, we're going to say no, obviously. And God's going to give us the power to do that. So don't be afraid to say no when these things come upon us. And finally, the last point, believers and non-believers are watching you and me. They really are. They want to see if our faith is strong enough that we will stand. They'll watch us really carefully when a situation is trying to get us to say no to God. This will only take a half an hour. This won't really hurt you. This is something, it'll make you feel better. You need this in your life. Wouldn't you just love to feel good for just a half an hour? Whatever it is. And the enemy wants you to say, yeah, I'll try that for a half an hour. But there is no such thing as a half an hour with the enemy. Because once you step into that, it becomes a lot more than a half an hour. So there are people watching us. That's not to put pressure on us, but that's to say we are an example. The way we conduct our life, our attitudes toward other people, what we do when we meet somebody who would give anything to have a loaf of bread, and they beg for it, and the bakery says, no, you can't. You can't have what's back there that's 2 days old, and we're going to throw it away. No, I can't give that to you. And you step up and you say, I'll pay for that. I'll give that to you. People are watching. They see those things. They look at us besides on Sunday. Where are you during the week? Where are you at night? What are you doing? What kind of example do we show these people for Jesus Christ? We're here to encourage each other. And God has given us these messages about stepping out because He wants to give us the strength, the faith, the provision, the willingness, all of it to step out. Let's do it. Let's step out. We're getting ready to go into a new situation here in Redmond. we can step out. The three of us, we drove down there last Friday, and we were there in front of the building. And it was like somebody took a stick and hit the hornet's nest, because there were high school kids everywhere. Right around the corner is the Redmond School Academy. And it was lunchtime. And I don't know, they must get some time, a good bit of time. Because those kids were going everywhere with their backpacks and their lunches, you could tell. And I'm sitting there and I'm looking at this building and I'm looking at that and I'm going, wow, God, are you going to create a situation where at lunch we could actually open the doors and we could actually have some tables set up and we could actually invite some of these kids, if they want to come in and eat their lunch, but also maybe have a Bible study at the same time for their lunch hour? I don't know. I don't know exactly what God's doing, but I know He's putting us in a new situation where we're going to be asked to step out, whatever it is, whatever it is. So I'm excited about it, and I know you are too. So let's thank God for this example of these three boys who said no. Father, thank you today for moving on our hearts to encourage us to say no when the world and the enemy is trying to get us to say yes to Him and to the world. Father, thank you for giving us the strength, the provision, and the wisdom, and the guidance to say, no, I'm not going to do that. No. Because, God, we know this world is against you. It is not for you. Help us, Lord, to say no. Help us to encourage each other to say no. And then to step out in faith in that situation. And we give you all the glory and the praise. In Jesus' name.